This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Impact confirmed. The Slayer has been activated.
Demonic threat level increasing.
Hold the line!
All the power of hell cowering before one man.
id Software presents Doom: The Dark Ages. Available May 15th on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC. Pre-order now.
Rated M for mature.
It was 4 a.m. on April 8, 2005, in a quiet alley in Iksan, South Korea. Most people are still asleep in this city known for its rice fields and temples. Everything in the Shin neighborhood felt cozy, like usual. It's the kind of place where nothing really exciting or bad ever happens. Mr. Kim and his wife had already left early that morning, but as their neighbors woke up, everyone started gathering near their home. Bloodstains dripped down the pavement, leading from their home, following an alleyway. The blood led to the rooftop. They climbed up to the rooftop and found the naked body of a young woman. A blanket was wrapped around her. She had been stabbed and left to die. You may have never heard of the Iksan killer before, but for the people in Iksan, they'll never forget Park Jong-min. Welcome to Korean True Crime with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my amazing patrons for making this show possible. You can also support Korean True Crime on Patreon today. Links are in the description. You can also join our Discord for movie nights, and it's a great way to connect with us. If you're interested in new merch for the show, you can find our new design called God's Wrath on my Fourth Wall store, which you can find in the description or any of my socials. In today's episode, you might notice that the killer is referred to in articles and some of my sources by two different names, Park Jong-min and Park Yong-soo. It's believed that Jong-min is his real name leaked by sources, and Yong-soo was a pseudonym that official news sources were using for him before his information was released. We will refer to him as Park Jong-min. Warning: today's episode contains a graphic description of murder, sexual assault, and necrophilia. Listener discretion is strongly advised. It was an early morning in the Shin neighborhood of Iksan. It was just a little bit before 4 a.m. Most people were asleep, except 23-year-old Kim In-nae, which is a pseudonym we will use for her privacy. In-nae was at home after her family had left. Her parents ran a fruit store and needed to leave quite early to get to work. The house was quiet after they left. That is, until Park Jong-min, a 23-year-old drifter who's been out of prison for just 10 days, arrives at her door. He'd served time for robbery and rape, and already he was back to his old ways. Over the last few hours, Jong-min had been downing bottle after bottle of soju and was trying to find something bad to do. As he walked through the Shin neighborhood, he got an idea. He spotted In-nae's parents leaving and saw an opportunity to break into their house. He assumed the house would be empty, so he slipped inside, put on some rubber gloves he found in the kitchen, and grabbed a knife. He wasn't going to search the house without being armed first. He'd learned that lesson before, so just in case, he grabbed a knife. In-nae was home. She was asleep in her bedroom on the second floor. She woke up to hear Jong-min rummaging through drawers in the house. As soon as she saw him, she screamed. Jong-min turned the knife on her, demanding that she stay quiet. Then he told her, "Take off your clothes." This isn't the first time he had raped someone at knife point. She started to comply, but when he grabbed her to try to sexually assault her, Ine fought back, hard. As she hit him, he took the knife and stabbed her in the chest, and then again in the side. She continued to try to struggle against him as she bled out. Jong-min would later tell the police without emotion, "I didn't mean to kill her, but she resisted too much, so I just stabbed her." We cover a lot of murders on this podcast, but what he did next is what really sets this kind of behavior into the realm of unspeakable evils. Jong-min's clothes were soaked in blood, so he calmly changed into clean ones that he took from Ine's dad's wardrobe. He got a garbage bag and threw his blood-soaked clothes inside. Jong-min would say that as he looked at Ine's lifeless body, he started to feel an uncontrollable lust. This is what earned Jong-min the name 핏빛 욕정 살인자, the Bloodlust killer. Jong-min wrapped Ine's body in a blanket and carried it 20 meters to the rooftop of a neighboring house. He was worried that Ine's parents would come home and find him, and he wanted to move somewhere more secluded. He wanted more time with her. On that rooftop, he sexually assaulted her corpse. Necrophiliac serial killers are driven by complex and rare psychological impulses that deviate significantly from typical human behavior. Necrophilia is the sexual attraction to or sexual activity with a corpse. It's classified as a psychological disorder in the DSM-5 and often stems from a desire to control intimacy or power over an unresisting partner. Killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Nelson exhibited necrophiliac behavior, and they were driven by a need for control, possession, and they had the inability to form healthy emotional relationships with a living partner. Necrophiliac serial killers are often motivated by a desire to dominate their victims entirely, even after death, sometimes to fulfill fantasies of an idolized, non-resistant partner, someone who cannot say no. Mental illnesses like antisocial personality disorder, paraphilias, are commonly associated with necrophiliac serial killers. For instance, Jeffrey Dahmer's necrophilia was tied to his obsessive need to preserve his victims. There is no single diagnosis that universally explains necrophilia, but it's generally believed that there is a complex interplay of trauma, sexual deviance, and psychopathy that leads to this kind of behavior. The prevalence of necrophilia among serial killers is really low, with only a very small subset of documented cases involving it. Estimates are really difficult for this, of course. Those that we do know have become notorious for it, like Ed Gein or John Wayne Gacy. Forensic research suggests that necrophilia may occur in less than 5% of serial murder cases. It's often a secondary behavior rather than the primary motive for murder. Park Jong-min would tell the police, "I felt a lust after seeing her bleeding and dead. Once I felt it, I couldn't control myself." After sexually assaulting Ine, Park Jong-min fled the scene, throwing away his garbage bag of bloody clothes in a nearby trash can. But an hour later, he started to get antsy. He had an uncontrollable desire to return to the crime scene. He got in a taxi and went back to the rooftop. His plan was to revisit Ine's body to see if anyone had found it, but truly he was planning to sexually assault her body once again. Except when he arrived, the neighbors had found her body and the area was swarming with police. He acted like a concerned neighbor, observed the scene for a while, and then left. He got on a KTX train to Cheonan, which is about an hour away. Ine's family was left to find their daughter's body, while he escaped. He laid low in Cheonan for about a month. Cheonan is sometimes called the core city of South Korea because it's this huge transportation hub outside of Seoul. Park Jong-min was in the Shinbu area in Cheonan, loitering, getting drunk like usual. It was close to 2 a.m. on May 5th when he passed a small villa apartment building. He felt like he had the urge to break in and steal something. Keep in mind, in the passing month, he had been breaking and entering and robbing homes consistently. Inside the apartment was 22-year-old Lee Sung-ae, another pseudonym for privacy. Sung-ae was sleeping in her studio apartment. Jong-min made his way easily into the apartment, but this time he came prepared to find someone. He was wearing gloves and had a knife. He started rifling through her stuff loudly, knowing that she would wake up because she was right there in the bed. And she did wake up. Sung-ae woke up and screamed. Jong-min lunged at her with the knife and a roll of duct tape. He started taping over her eyes and mouth. Then he moved on to tie her hands and feet. When he got his breath, he pulled out the knife and stabbed her to death. The only thing he took from the apartment was about 50,000 won or $40. However, unlike what he did to Ine, he didn't sexually assault Sung-ae's body. The police speculated that the reason he chose to resist his urges in this instance has a lot to do with the fact that at the time the news had reported they found DNA at the Iksan crime scene. He wasn't confident enough that he would get away with it again. One of the investigators suggested that it's highly likely he wanted to act on his necrophiliac urges, but he stopped himself because he was afraid of getting caught. It just didn't make sense that he would kill her over 50,000 won. Sung-ae's death was tragic and horrific, and he just left the crime scene like it was nothing. Jong-min left with 50,000 won in his pocket and went to Seoul. He kept moving from area to area, hoping the police wouldn't find him. In Seoul, he met up with a man that he had known in prison. This man was also serving time for robbery. And together, they would rack up more than 100 thefts in the next few months. They were breaking into homes, stealing cars, and pocketing millions of won in valuables. If he had stopped after the murder of Sung-ae, then he might have gotten away with it. But the string of robberies plaguing Seoul started to help the police close in on him. To understand his actions, we need to go a little bit back. Park Jong-min grew up in Yeosu, a coastal city in the south. His childhood was rough, to say the least. He was raised by a single mom who worked very late nights at a restaurant and had an older brother with a spinal disability. Money was incredibly tight, and Jong-min dropped out of high school because of it. He needed to make money for the family, and he found that theft was the easiest and fastest way to do that. By the age of 23, he had been in and out of prison 5 times for robbery, rape, and theft. Well, at first, he was just taking money for his mom and brother, something that maybe we can sympathize with. But the issue is he wasn't just breaking into people's homes and stealing valuables to make money. That's theft. He was committing robbery and sexually assaulting women. He discovered a desire to control others and harm them. The difference between theft and robbery is that robbery involves the use of force to take something. Theft is a property crime. Robbery is crime against a person. And he was getting away with a lot of this because he didn't fit the typical profile of what we consider a monster to look like. That's why so many of these killers get away with it. It's like pretty privilege for murderers. He was short, under 5'7", and considered handsome with a baby face. He looked like a teenager even at 23. He looked a lot younger than he was. He also didn't look like a sick and demented necrophiliac. A lot of news agencies would compare him to Yoo Young-chol, who I covered on my old YouTube channel, but I've not covered on this podcast. Yoo Young-chol is one of the most infamous serial killers in Korea. He killed 21 people. Park Jong-min insists that he's different from him because he only killed women who resisted him. He was weirdly, proud of this fact, as if it made him more powerful. He said Yoo Young-chol slaughtered people randomly. In his head, he has total control over the women he killed, and that gave him power. Despite Jong-min not agreeing, the parallels are there. They both killed very coldly with no clear motive and had troubled upbringings. They also displayed no remorse or guilt. After his arrest, the police would try to get Jong-min to undergo psychiatric evaluations because they believed that his sexual perversion was pathological, namely necrophilia, but he was never given any treatment. He refused. So unfortunately, we don't really know if his twisted impulses were something he couldn't or wouldn't control. Back at the start of the investigation, where Ine's body was found on the rooftop, the Jeongbuk police started the investigation when they were called into the crime scene. The neighbors stated that they had not heard or seen anything suspicious that morning. Ine's parents obviously had no clue either. They had already left when he arrived. The investigation hit a wall immediately. Detective Jang Sung-woo of the Violent Crimes Unit led this investigation. When he spoke to the media, he described the crime scene as a scene from a brutal movie. The only piece of evidence they were able to collect at the crime scene were a few shoe prints that had a very unique tread pattern on them. But with nothing to compare it to, they couldn't do anything. And because they didn't have any leads, they had to cast a very wide net. So they ended up questioning about 25,000 people who had criminal records in the province. They analyzed 2 million phone records and 1 million communication data points. They put a lot of effort into the investigation, which is something I don't always say on this podcast, so I was quite surprised. They were suspecting that whoever the killer was someone with a violent past and someone who knew the area well. A few days later, they finally found a lead when one of the neighbors discovered the discarded garbage bag full of bloody clothes. The first thing they noticed was that inside the clothes was a torn laundromat ticket. On the ticket was part of a word. It read oji. The police started a search for any laundromat or motel that had dry cleaning services that had oji in the title. There's no more movement in the case until May 5th at Sunghae's murder in Cheonan. This is what would change everything. The police noticed the similarities, namely the kitchen knife and the gloves and the stabbing. But the most crucial comparison was that they found those same sneaker treads. They had proof that the two crimes were connected. They suspected it, but this was hard evidence. Do you know how unlikely it would be for two different killers to have the same MO, wear the same shoe in the same size? Very, very unlikely. So they knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Of those 25,000 people who had a criminal record, the police began to narrow it down to violent criminals only. And then at the suggestion of Detective Jang Sung-woo, they believed that they were looking for someone who had recently been released from prison. They believed that this could not be someone new to a life of crime because of how skilled they were entering and leaving the homes without anyone noticing. But while this did narrow it down quite a bit, it still didn't tell them for sure that it was Park Jong-min. They couldn't go around staking out hundreds of men in the province, so they utilized the best tools they had access to, namely phone records. They had a lot of work to get through because tracking phone records for suspicious activity would take hundreds of man-hours. The police ended up needing to analyze 2 million phone records and 1 million communication data points. When I read this, I honestly didn't quite comprehend what that meant. In 2005, this method would look a lot different from what it does now. First, they had to access phone records from telecom providers. At this time, this includes call logs, so the date, time, and duration of a call, as well as the number that was dialed or received. Text messages were time-stamped and had the recipient's number, but the actual messages were not able to be collected without a specific warrant. Then lastly, cell tower pings. Records of which cell tower a phone connected to would allow the police to find the approximate location when a phone was active. They focused on phones that were active in Iksan and Cheonan on the days of the murders. They included surrounding areas, but were looking specifically for any cell phones that belonged to one of those 25,000 men. This would drastically narrow down the number. Detective Jang was able to obtain a warrant due to the severity of the crime and access more invasive data from the registered phones. There was always the possibility that the killer had used a burner phone or had turned the phone off, but they were kind of hoping the killer hadn't, because this was their best lead. But if the phone had been turned off, then there would be timestamps for the time it was off as well, and that was crucial to this investigation. The computer program the police used to flag anomalies in phone activity showed that during the time of both of the murders, one phone had been turned off while next to a cell tower just blocks from the crime scene on the respective days of both of the murders. Afterwards, when the phone was turned on again, the next pinged location was near Seoul, which meant they knew their killer had fled taking the train. They believed that they had found their man. a recently released criminal with a violent past with no prior murders. This was a criminal escalating their crimes. Park Jong-min's phone data made him a suspect that they were now authorized to stake out. Police in Iksan followed his phone's location, but they couldn't arrest him yet, and they were worried that arresting him would cause him to clam up. Phone tracking also wasn't very accurate, so they hadn't located him until his phone pinged a tower in Jeongju. So they followed him until on August 7th, 2005, they caught him trying to steal a car. The Jeonju Police Department informed Detective Jang that there had been a string of car thefts, robberies, and home invasions in the last few weeks. That sounded like their guy. When the police finally arrested Jong-min, he attempted to resist arrest. He was fighting them. He was screaming, "Why are you arresting me? I didn't do anything wrong." The interrogation didn't really need to go on for very long, despite him denying all of the crimes. He started to admit to some of the thefts and then all of the thefts, but was vehemently denying that he had killed anyone. That is, until the police told him, "We found your bloody clothes. We have your DNA at the crime scene." And that's what he was most paranoid about this entire time. It's what led to him resisting his urge to rape Sung-hae's corpse. He was paranoid he would leave DNA behind. But it wasn't the bloody clothes he had been worried about the entire time. When the police took him to the location of Inhe's murder for an on-site reenactment, he calmly went through what happened. He didn't really seem especially upset that he'd been arrested, or he didn't seem embarrassed having to reenact the crimes. After recreating the murder and act of necrophilia, he went downstairs to Inhe's family's house. He told the officers, "Hey, they rearranged the furniture, including the location of the fridge." He had only been in the house for a short while, yet he remembered where everything was. He told the officers he had actually waited in the family's home for a while after the murder, so he could get a drink of water. A detective asked him why he committed necrophilia, and he just shrugged. He said, "I wanted to do it." Park Jong-min wasn't just a killer. He was a monster. He was facing charges for robbery, murder, rape, and desecration of a corpse. There's no specific law criminalizing necrophilia, but it is covered by desecration of a corpse. The ex-prison mate was also apprehended and charged with special theft for more than 100 incidences that they'd done together in the past few months. When Park Jong-min went to trial, he was silent the entire time. He refused to speak, even when asked to give a statement. Usually people use that time to beg for forgiveness, show some humility, remorse. No, he just sat with a blank look on his face. This really upset the judges so much that they demanded he write a letter and bring it to the next hearing. They wanted to hear him express his feelings. But Jong-min didn't write an apology letter. Instead, he wrote a letter blaming society for his own actions. He didn't apologize once. At his sentencing, which happened in December 2005, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. It was the obvious outcome. It was clear that given any freedom, he would kill again. He was spared the death penalty due to his difficult childhood because they stated his upbringing steered him into a bad path. A lot of people thought life imprisonment was too lenient. They really wanted the death penalty, but honestly, even if he got the death penalty, he would not have been put to death in his lifetime. No one's been put to death in Korea in a long time. The judge said, giving him a chance to repent is a just punishment. I'm not quite sure I agree with that, but it's what happened. Park Jong-min is still serving his life sentence in prison. He's still alive, and he would be about in his mid-40s now. Before we reflect on this case, I wondered what would lead someone to go from petty theft to necrophilia. Jong-min started with theft, likely due to the fact that he was living in poverty with a single mother and the disabled older brother. He needed to help provide for his family, so it was a necessity. But then he started to enjoy committing crimes too much, which escalated this to robbery when he was actually threatening and hurting people. This escalation is really common in criminals who become desensitized to crime as they engage in illegal acts more and more often. Stealing as a way to survive, but then it became something more fun. He felt powerful in a world where he had nothing. He was craving that control. Rape, as many know, is a crime of control. Jongmin's 5 prison stints in his youth proved that he wasn't just after the money. He was chasing power. By the time he committed the Iksan murder, Jongmin's crimes had already been sexually violent. His earlier rape convictions revealed a want to dominate, to exert power over women in violating ways. When Ine fought back, he stabbed her to death. He wasn't going to lose power to her. And the same thing happened with Sung-ae. Her screams for help led to her death. Psychologists call this a cycle of violence. Unresolved trauma or exposure to heightened aggression can push someone to escalate their crimes. Following his times in prison, he only continued to escalate each time that he was released. He had a difficult upbringing, sure, as many people do, so that really is not an excuse for his behavior. And then there's the necrophilia. After killing Ine, he said that he felt lust just looking at her dead body. He felt like he couldn't resist his urges to do what he did. Psychologists would say that necrophilia can stem from a need for total control. For Jongmin, it might have been a fantasy triggered by the murder itself. Him saying, "Once I think about it, I can't control myself," shows that he had paraphilia, which is an attraction to something other than a consenting partner. This isn't always a harmful kink, considering homosexuality was once considered a paraphilia, but modern day, paraphilia is characterized as a person experiencing distress associated with the act of sex, unwilling others or the inability for others to consent, or the risk of injury or death during the sexual act. Fetishes and kinks are often removed from these definitions due to the presence of consent. For example, paraphilia would be necrophilia, pedophilia, or exhibitionism. The fact that Jongmin drank heavily prior to both of the murders is an interesting fact. Drinking is not the cause, but it does inhibit a person's control over their urges and impulses. He likely was having fantasies about necrophilia and murder for a long time, and just this time, he drank so much he didn't want to resist them. Had he not been caught, it's likely he would have continued to escalate despite the cooling off periods. Jongmin also had a really weird mix of motives, which made him very unpredictable, which made him even more dangerous. Money was a huge motivator. He was always after money. But sex was too. He qualifies as a lust killer, someone whose violence is tied to sexual fantasies. When the victims fought back, he became enraged because they were challenging his control. So is Park Jong-min a serial killer? Well, yes. He had 2 murders and separate events with a cooling off period between. Even after his arrest, he told the police, "I was going to keep sexually assaulting and killing if I wasn't caught." He knew he wasn't going to stop. He didn't want to. The victims, Ine and Sung-ae, were more than that. Ine was a 25-year-old hairdresser with a huge smile and dreams of making it big and moving to a big city. Sung-ae was only just carving out her independence when she was killed at the age of 22. Their parents were left with the grief of losing them, and while I give credit to the police in this case for catching him and putting in adequate effort to stop him, I wonder if after 5 times in prison for violent crimes, especially including raping women, maybe he should have been monitored a little bit more closely after his releases. If he was, it might have saved these women's lives. When I research cases that involve sexual assault, it often puts a little bit of blame on the women for putting themselves in dangerous situations. But what happened to Ine and Sung-ae was not their fault. Whether they kept their doors locked, whether they were more observant, nothing would have changed this situation. It's already happened. There is no what ifs. But cases like these make me wonder, how can we stay safe? Is there no way to prevent a deranged monster from finding a way to hurt you? I'll start by stating the obvious that they always say. Don't go out alone at night, lock your windows and doors, learn to protect yourself. But I think this advice puts the pressure on women that we need to live in a world where it's happening. I think it's more important that together we learn to advocate for mental health resources to help stop troubled people from reaching predator levels. If a proper mental health check and rehabilitation program had been provided to Park Jong-min in prison, he might have learned to resist these urges and grow his empathy for others. If we can get to these hurt people while they're still young, while they're still in those beginning stages of thinking about hurting other people, then we may be able to prevent the escalation to such horrific crimes. But that is just my opinion. I always want to believe that there can be good in others. Thank you for joining me on Korean True Crime. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it or leave a review. Check the description for a link to our Discord, Patreon, and the new merch. Find my sources for free on Patreon. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.